normally get these rankings in the Providence Journal or different papers, you know, what they tend to look like is, you know, the populations of our state by socioeconomic status. And this is nothing against districts like Barrington and East Greenwich, but when there's a concentrated amount of affluence in those communities, there's an expectation with that those standardized test scores would become higher. And that's not necessarily the case at Fishing Cove. And it's also important when we're looking at test scores to look at trends, is something that you pointed out tonight, Dr. Humbert. And you can clearly see a trend at Fishing Cove in the right direction. And when Mrs. Seitler came to the district, it was the same year that as a matter of fact, I think Mrs. Seitler was the last recommendation I made as assistant superintendent as a hire, and then I became superintendent and she became principal at the same time. And that summer, Dr. Humbert, Mrs. Seitler, and I had a meeting with RIDE about the warning status at Fishing Cove. So that's how far they've come. And that's a remarkable thing to do in 5 years. And it is really worthy of commendation. And the commissioner will be visiting Fishing Cove on November the 9th. I believe. We'll make sure that the community hears about that. And rightfully he should, because it's a great achievement for Mrs. Seitler and the staff at Fishing Cove. So, thank you.
Dr. Humbert, can I ask one question? Just in looking at your slides, one thing concerned me, the high school test scores. And while NK was above average at 48% in 2016, it was a decrease from 2015. 2015 was 52%, 2016 was 48%, but the state was only 26%. So are there any feedbacks or anything for us to understand how the state of Rhode Island is only 26% proficient in science and why the high school dropped a little bit? Like, is there anything we can do differently to improve those scores? Or they just seem low to me, and I'm just looking for any comment or feedback.
And if you remember back on the park too,
I know.
the park scores were
The park
very low.
Didn't those scores reflect the people who took the test scores? Like kneecap, doesn't everyone take them though? So we get a better percentage?
Oh, with the kneecap?
With the kneecap, yeah.
Yeah,
So
except
we
the
had a lot of opt-outs, but with the kneecap,
Yeah, well,
takes them.
but remember that we only do it in 4th grade and 8th grade and in 11th grade. So
see us go down a little bit and the state go down.
yeah, so the state went down 5.5%,
Yeah,
and we went down 4%.
So that's just a bit of a concern. So I'm wondering, can we do something different, or do we know why? Maybe maybe what other assistant superintendents are talking about and educators as to why?
Yeah, so there are a few things. The first thing is that, as I mentioned, it's a grade span test. I mean, it has been right along. So but sometimes you wonder where the emphasis is in the test, where the emphasis was in the curriculum, and was there a mismatch? So that's one of the things that we're seeing. Another thing could be motivation. With the middle school, we thought it was a lack of enough time because they generally do put a lot of effort into it. I'm not sure at the high school if the effort and motivation is a factor or not this particular year. It's hard to say.
Okay, thank you. It was just a number that stood out to me.
Yeah, I think Cheryl, if you look at the state as a whole at the high school level, was down 4%.
Right, to 26, yeah.
I mean, when you look at, I pick out districts like Barrington was down 3%. There's, you go down the high school list, Cherahoe was down 7%.
And so I just hope, and Bob, you're right, like percentages are down, so I hope educators are just looking at those numbers and trying to figure out why they decreased in this particular year.
Yeah, I agree. It makes you wonder if it's something about the test as well.
Exactly, yes.
Right.
Not as bad as the the year that we really plummeted. You remember at the middle level, that was, and that was some of the test items. But I'm looking now that you mentioned it, Ms. Clark, and I'm looking at the state for middle level at 19%. That's rather abysmal.
I totally agree with you, and that's what I'm trying to reference here.
It's really important to come to these conversations with an open mind and look at trends. Those are important. But you're dealing with tests that the alignment to curriculum is really tricky. The whole state works together. Dr. Humbert regularly attends meetings with all of the assistant superintendents of the state and with RIDE. And we get as much information as we possibly can to anticipate, what will be tested. And that should be what is in the curriculum. But particularly in years where you have a several year span, like the science, 4, 8, and 11, you could go for a couple of years without necessarily thinking of the test in mind. And you're hoping that you could learn a lot of great science in those years, but it just doesn't happen to be the exact same science that's on that test. And that could hurt you. So I think people have to come to scores like 48%, 19%, all that, and understand that those terms are relative in a lot of sense. And without rock solid, if you're an educator and you're giving your own test, you know what's on the test on Friday. You know what you're going to give to your students on the quiz on Friday. And you're going to teach to those standards so that students will be prepared to take that test on Friday. With the standardized tests, you have a sense of what's going to be on the test a few years from now, but you don't have the exact, roadmap. And that can be very frustrating. A lot of great work in this state, particularly in science, and North Kingstown is part of the GEMSET consortium and has a tremendous science department at the high school, great engineering program starting up now, and we're doing things as well as anybody that I can think of. And still, we're at 49%. So it can be frustrating in that sense. So I just think it's important to think about those terms.
Please.
So something that could contribute to the middle school and possibly the other changes, the teachers have been kind of telling us for a couple of years because we kind of came in. We started, especially the math and sciences, we started learning in math and sciences that would be taught and stuff like this, the actual fact-based stuff. We started learning this before Common Core was started to be implemented. So what teachers have kind of been telling us, especially in middle school, is that, and we've been realizing it too, there's little gaps in our learning because it was stuff we were expected to learn later, but then the new standards came into place and we were expected to learn those skills early. So there's certain things like that we, because we're in the transition period between not Common Core and Common Core, that we haven't entirely learned and we're expected to know. And I think that could possibly contribute to those drops, especially in middle school.
Thank you. That's a very good observation. I appreciate that.
I have to agree with that. We're catching up all the time, and so, but we're starting to see that, as you could tell with the POC results. In the lower grades, we're pretty solid. So it's exciting. Okay, so I just wanted to share with you the classifications came out. It's a part of our accountability system. And so I prepared for you this classification summary information, and this will indicate to you the way the accountability is measured this particular year. It is a transition year, so the metrics have actually changed from what we used previously and what the state held us accountable to, and they to the federal government. So the metrics are different. So you can't compare this year with last year as far as the classification, even the cutoffs. It's different. It's just different ways of measuring it. So what you have, you can see the chart below. on the first page shows you the 3 areas that the schools are measured on, and that is the percent that meets expectations, so that's proficiency levels. And even within that, there are nuances that are different. For example, it's now weighted for students who have an IEP and students who have other disabilities or disadvantages, like our ELL population. So there were those are weighted, and they're weighted for performance levels. It gets very complicated, so I'm not going to go into all of that. Also, there is credit given for students who are scored a 1 or 2 or a 3, which is below proficiency, and that was never the case before. A difference was last year we were measured by how many kids exceeded expectations, and that is not a measurement this year. So you can see how things vary very much with this. The gap closure, we had gap closure last year. It was done totally different with a reference group. This year it's not done that way. It's done by a 25% lowest percentile, and that's explained in this bulletin. It's very interesting. That is compared to the scale score of 750, and that's how that metric is calculated. And then we have our growth scores. And you can see on the chart that you get points for each one of these things. We don't have a growth score for the high school, but the high school has graduation rates, which obviously the other levels don't have. So that's a different factor there. And so altogether, the composite score, maximum points would be 100 points. So when you are looking at this sheet here that has the measurements and what each of our schools scored for composite, it adds up all the points, and that's the composite score, and that determines what the rating is. The only 3 ratings that were used this time were the commended schools, and the commended schools needed to have a composite score over 90. And then they had the focus and priority schools. If you weren't a focus or priority school last year, you didn't become one this year, in this transition year. So that's important to note, too. Although if you were one last year, you had the ability to move out of the label. So that's interesting, too. So you can see on this what the scores were, and you can also see that Wickford Middle School was a commended school. And then I gave you the report cards for each of the schools, and so every single school's report card is there. This can be a little confusing, so I just want to point out on the left side is the proficiency scores for all of the subgroups. And if you see a star, it means that there weren't enough students in that particular subgroup for there to be a score. But everything on the right is all about participation. So if you see, mostly it's yeses, but if you see a no, and you say, well, how come we were a yes with all students, and we were a no when it came to Native American, well, that means that we didn't have all of the Native Americans in that school. They did not reach 95%. So if there were six in that subcategory and you had 2 that didn't take it, then you would have a no. So that's what that's about. So when you look at the report card, everything on the right is about participation. So that's a lot to process. So I know, if you have a chance and you want to look these over more closely and use the summary information, I'm happy to answer any questions because I've dealt with these cutoff scores for several years now. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Woodbury. Mrs. Gilly, do we have anyone signed up for citizens' comments? We do not. Thank you. So, we're going to remove executive session from the agenda because we didn't have one this evening, so there's nothing to report. Do I have any exemptions to the consent agenda? Can I have a motion to approve all items on the consent agenda?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Mrs. King, do you have anything to report for the 2016-17 school budget?
No.
Would you like to report on the CIP bond fund future bond?
Yes, so we're at that time of year again that we're going to be submitting our FY18 capital improvement plan to the town council. And I met with the facility subcommittee last week, October 11th, for them to review the data that's in your packet. So I know that there was a lot of information presented to you. What I can tell you is that the actual Excel spreadsheet that has the CIP, the capital items on it, has not changed dramatically. Mostly we're just kicking out the years. I have added a few items. But basically we're still right in that $20-30 million range, 5 to 10 years out. And unfortunately we're still in a situation where we still don't have a plan. This is going into my 5th year here, and we still, as a town, North Kingstown townwide, we don't have a plan for capital. We did have a switch from general funds to capital funds in our budget in this current year. Of those funds, we've used about $250,000 of that $500,000. We have about $250,000 left. And I expect to bring forward the other part of our big electrical upgrade to use those funds in this, quite frankly. But, like I said, we're in year number 5. We're not going anywhere with the plan. And the buildings, I don't have to tell you, you've all heard it before, our buildings are not getting any younger. We have another item agenda here that Dr. Jay will talk about for a long-term infrastructure planning. I'll take any questions or any changes you guys want to make to the document that I put forward, but it really, if you look back at last year, it's really not a lot different than it was last year. And I said last year also that, we can argue that maybe it's not 30 million, maybe it's 20 million, maybe it's 50 million, but it's not zero. And every day it gets more and more because the buildings get older and older and a new item comes up and a new issue surfaces. So I just can't say enough that I just don't know what to do for us to be able to work together with the town council to get some sort of a plan for capital for the whole town. I just think it's a shame that we just haven't talked about it. It's 5 years since I've been here, and I don't think there was a whole lot of discussion before I was here either.
So, just a couple of comments. I agree with you, Mrs. King. We go over the same thing year after year after year. We asked the town council to give us at least a $500,000 influx towards our CIP capital program that we don't get. And, I know the plan doesn't fluctuate all that much each year, and we have really old buildings and everything's falling apart, but is there any comment you can make just to the public? Has anything risen to the occasion that's come to the forefront this year that's just critical, that has to be addressed? I know everything has to be addressed, but is there one thing in particular that we just can't wait any longer and we need funds to fix it?
Well, Mrs. McGovern can correct me if she thinks I'm wrong, but I think it's the electrical issue that we've started working on. We're in 2 phases. We have one phase that's started. It's just over $100,000. And that's kind of the small phase. The big phase is switching out switchgear, which is the big whole heart of the electrical system in a couple of our schools. And that's for the Federal Pacific equipment that has been identified that needs to be removed from the schools. But you're right. I mean, I'm sure that anybody would look at this and everybody might have a different idea of what's critical. But I kind of think that might be one of the top items.
And you deal with it on a day-to-day basis, so you kind of know, what is in the forefront.
And that's kind of we knew that we had some electrical work, electrical panels and boxes and whatnot that need to be, as a building, we have more technology in a building, it doesn't mean that our electrical system can accommodate it. But I think this was kind of a newer issue that I don't think we really expected the switchgear and all that, and it's incredibly expensive. But I think that's kind of surfaced at the top.
You know, right, we're starting the season right now with our principals looking at, you know, their budgetary needs going into next year. And when we do that exercise, we talk to them about, you know, their buildings and, you know, are there things that they're noticing that should be listed or, you know, or have a higher priority on our capital improvement. And what I plan on doing is kind of cataloging all of those points and sharing them with the school committee and the town council when we have our meeting in December. And it's hard to necessarily prioritize one thing over another because there are many very deserving projects right now. Our high school track, for instance, is in terrible shape. It needs to be replaced, and there's, you know, we'll be talking about that in upcoming meetings about a project. Hopefully, with a lot of private money to help on that. Tennis courts are an issue at the high school. At Fishing Cove, there are carpets there that have probably been there for the age of the school, it seems. They are in deplorable shape, and they need to be replaced. We're talking at Davisville Middle School. There are lockers there that have been there for the age of that school, it seems. And they need, some of the lockers have been replaced, but about half of them have not been replaced, and they're in terrible condition. We're getting to a point now that you can't even fix them. You just basically put a board over a locker when it's unusable anymore. So, you know, and that's going to get into this next item too, with the infrastructure project. Those kinds of things may be able to be addressed in that, but when you're talking about a long-term infrastructure plan, we could be years away from addressing some of this. And you know, I think it's important for people to see these things. You know, I would like to have tours of different schools with school committee and town council members to see up close what these items look like. I think too often we're dealing with these items theoretically, and it just becomes a number and not something that we have a vision of what it actually is that we're voting for. So I'd like the emphasis to move a little bit more in that direction. But there are a lot, you know, every school, every principal could point out very deserving projects that needed to happen years ago, and we're still, you know, kind of on hold because even at $500,000 it's not as far as where it used to go, you know, and so we could probably use that 10 to 20 times over.
Ms. McGovern, you wanted to say something?
So, as far as the $500,000 that was allocated this year, the town council did allocate that for capital.
This year, correct.
However, just as the budget was being finalized and adopted, we became aware of this electrical issue. So, you know, it would have been nice if we could have gone to our CIP and picked that high priority project that could have been funded with that money, but instead we had to spend it on something else that cropped up.
And even at that, it was kind of late timing, you know, because large projects like that, like we found out that at the very end of April, it's very difficult to plan in that short time frame a summer project, especially of the $500,000 range. So you're really, it would be really nice if we could get some of this funding, you know, if we could know January, February, so then that way we could plan for the summer. So that was another piece. We just happened to be, we were moving into something to throw, you know, to put the money toward. But even at that, it's not completely spent. We just started getting phase one for the electrical going.
Just one question though. We did request from the town council to allocate some of that $500,000 funding towards the electrical, correct?
Yes.
We did not ask them for anything specific. They gave us the $500,000, earmarked it in town funds, and we are asking for it as we need it.
Okay.
So we used some of it for the playground, knowing that, you know, the electrical is further out.
Yeah.
The second piece for the electrical, and then the remaining, I assume, we will use for the electrical as well. I would caution you from asking for something specific unless you know it's something that you're planning.
So are we going to exceed the request of the 500,000? Like, so we've already requested some of those funds, right?
We are going to have to use, my estimate, we're going to have to use some of our
We're going to be above and
funds.
beyond the 500. We're going to have to use fund balance or something.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I was looking for. Just one second.
Sorry, so I wasn't done.
Oh, sorry.
So that was just the electrical part.
Okay.
But as far as the CIP, I think it is important to have a capital improvement plan for both the schools and the town buildings so that they can plan the allocation as the years go on. The thing is, with municipal budgets, they don't have a lot of flexibility from year to year because of the union contracts and standard requests that take up so much of where the tax dollars go every year. We don't have a lot of flexibility in saying, well, we want 500,000 this year, we're going to need 3.3 next year, 1.2 the following year, and going up and down. It needs to be more level. And I noticed in our CIP that we have pushed a few projects out. Not that they're not priorities right now. I think it was more trying to be realistic that the funding isn't available, it hasn't been available. However, the recommendation was to request $1 million, but if you look out 5 years, our total is $20 million, and I think we would be negligent if we didn't request more. You're not going to get more than you ask for, ever. So we should ask for what we need to get these projects done. The track, we're going to get in trouble. We're going to have to close down the facility and
Can't use it now.
make
Tennis
other,
courts are a liability too.
again, and roofs. I mean, there's so many buildings, so many roofs. When's the next boiler going to crop up? Because they only last 20 or 30 years, and
Sewer issues, you name it.
But even for the things we have identified, with $20 million in 5 years, I think we should be asking for more than one. I think it's an election year, but there's a lot of talk going on right now about all the different issues in town. We don't know what the makeup of the town council will be this budget season, but I think we should ask for what we need. And I think it should be more level, even if it's not $4 million a year for 5 years, if it was $3 million, $3.5 million, $4, some kind of a steady increase, but make it more realistic and at least try. If we try on our side, on the submittal,
Right.
we can't expect any more if we don't ask.
And along those lines, if you'll see, the year 2020 and the year 2021 are really big years. And the reason why I put it out in those years is because that would be the time frame if we had a bond on the referendum in 2018. So 2018 November is FY19.
But are you suggesting that on top of a middle school bond, or whatever that turns out to be, we should do capital too?
I am, because you can't forget that you are going to have buildings that remain that, unless we're going to kick that up and put money into them in 2018, 2019, it's just going to get worse after that.
Right. So, but I think that should be the backup plan. If we don't get what we need, we should say, well, we're going to need it in the next bond. But in our CIP, that should be an annual appropriation for capital. We should ask for what we need. And the bond would stand by itself for that construction project.
So I know there's a lot of people with questions, but I'm going to go in order. You raised your hand, you had a question?
I'd just like to add a comment about the track. So I've not only heard this from numerous students, but I've also experienced it. I've been on the track team and the cross-country team for the past 4 years. And I know that a lot of my classmates have not only gotten shin splints, but other injuries from the track because at this point it's really just asphalt and solid hard material. There's no rubber. There's there's no springy material on top of that hard material. So it's not really an issue when we train, but when we race on it and when we have meets on it, we're using really thin racing spikes. So that really exposes our feet and our joints to the hard material of the track. And that's really causing a lot of injuries in students. And I've heard a lot of uproar from not only the track team, but it's become such an issue that even friends of people that are on the track team are being concerned by this issue. So I'd just like to comment on that.
Thank you.
And clearly, if we don't do something, the bigger, grander plan of the high school complex, we are going to have to do something about that track and the fields. You're looking at several $100,000 there.
Okay, Mr. Glasgow and then Mr. Jones.
So I want to sort of comment on something Mr. McGovern said, which is that you're absolutely right. We need to have, look at a capital improvement budget with what's the total for 30 million, and to ask for 500,000. Okay, that doesn't work. I mean, you can't have a 10-year plan with a $30 million budget and then ask for $500,000 a year. Simple math tells you that doesn't work. So we need to have a realistic budget to get those things done. And if there are certain things that have to be, I don't think there's much on here that's like a wish that we can make go away, but I mean, there are certainly priority items. But what really needs to happen is a discussion between the town and the school committee, a real, honest budget discussion about how the town and us along with it are going to fund these items. It's been an issue for many, many years in the town. Come to a head this year with our town hall issues and issues with the town hall annex, all showing what happens when you defer maintenance to the point where you have to vacate and close a building. And if we were ever negligent to the point where we needed to vacate and close a school due to a maintenance issue, I mean, imagine what that would mean. We can't let that happen. So, we have budget meetings with the town council every year. They're often perfunctory. I think they really cannot be perfunctory meetings. They need to be real, honest discussions. And I think both sides need to be prepared this coming budget season to have real discussions and then try to come up with solutions at these meetings so that we can know what the town is committed to do. Because for almost all of these items, we can't do it all. We can't appropriate any money. So any budget items, whether it's a capital improvement line item in our budget, needs to come from the town. They need to tell us what they are able to do. Or if it is looking at the backup plan that Mrs. King was referring to, which is we're looking at some type of bond financing because we determined that we're unable to do it in a single year ongoing budget, we can't do any bond financing without the town's cooperation either. So no matter what this plan is going to be, it needs to have the support and coordination with the town council. And both the school committee going forward, those of us who are going to remain and our new members coming in, and whoever, as you mentioned, the new town councilors may be, whether they're the same or new people. We've got a lot of work to do, and I hope that everyone, I hope everyone on their side is prepared to sit down and talk and come up with some solutions. It's not going to be easy. There are no easy answers. Thank you.
Mr. Jones.
Thank you. So, to your first point, I think we would all agree. I think part of the dilemma is fix the track and then a year later go, oh, we're going to turf the field, right? And so it's a little bit of a shame that all those are tied into bundling it with the larger issue. So I would agree that if we're not going to turf the field, we need to then unbundle it and fix the smaller stuff. And I think that's part of what you were getting to, Sheila, in terms of we're getting to the point where we're bundling so much together that now it's a big number constantly. And I think one of the fixes we need to have is every year the town knows it's paving so many roads. I would commend us to adding the pictures. I would say, Mr. Thomas or the Comm Club or principals and PTOs, grab your video cameras and smartphones or whatever and video around your school these issues that you think need fixing, because just to even see the sidewalks and the driveway reinforces the point that those are huge liability issues,
And the
potentially.
cost of that is astronomical. You look back in June when you approved 3 playgrounds, only the playground area. Seal coat only on Quinessa, and then complete, replacement, Forest Park and Hamilton, $150,000 playground area only. Those are big, big dollars right there.
Right, and so I think it's the same approach the town has, which is you don't want to wait 15 years ago, we have to pave 50 miles of road, right? You want to pave 3, 4, 5 miles every year. We need something with the town that says, look, forget this part of stuff. Every year, we need to pave 10% of our sidewalks, or 15% of our sidewalks. And that's just money you need to put there, just like you put money for paving the town roads. And we can debate in any year if it's 10% or 15%, but for some items, we just need to know that you've got to do a little bit every year. And it's the same thing with the boiler. We know we're going to need one 5 to 7 years. Every year, we should be saying, let's put 20% of an anticipated boiler cost in a fund. So in the 5th year, when it breaks, we know we have this. So I think that's a little bit of budgeting that collectively the town and us need to decide on and just put the money away. And then we start talking about, items that come up or the sort of semi-recurring stuff that we have to deal with. And I would agree with you, Sheila. What's the point of prioritizing stuff if it has no link to what we request? So if we have items, I would argue 1 and 2, that should be the number, right? And then, asset management can look at it and make a judgment on the priorities. And then the town can say, based on all that, great, we can only fund so much. And clearly some things come up where priorities have to get adjusted if electrical comes up. But I would agree and say, let's look at what's our 1 and 2 priority items, that if we agree those are the 1 and 2 priority items, then that's the number. I mean, we're just sort of kidding ourselves, like you're saying, to say we're asking for $500,000 when we have, that's less than the sum of our even priority 1 items.
Wasn't the recommendation to ask for money?
Yeah, that's what we asked for last year,
So,
too.
but that doesn't cover our priority 1 and 2 items. So I would agree to say, and I understand why, the administration has presented the CIP the way it does, but again, I would like to say some things, that $250,000 that's 4 years out really needs to be $75,000 every year.
Well, what you have, the problem that you have is that you have a very large backlog that you're working off of, that you're trying to work off, and then there's no plan for the refresh. I mean, there are, millions of different methodologies that you can use to do that planning. You can do it by square foot. You can do it any way, but we haven't come up with how we're going to fix the backlog, and the backlog are the 1s and the 2s, and then you get into the 3s and the 4s even. So that it's a double issue. And the issue is that I think when you start getting into numbers that are this big, and again, I don't know that these numbers are exact. You're not going to know they're exact until you bid them. Our facilities subcommittee is great. They've taken a look and eyeballed things. We've adjusted things. But I think once you present to, the layperson, a $30 million item, the blinders go on, and it's very difficult for people to focus on. We've had some people focus on, a $250,000 item in the capital plan. Okay, make it $200,000. It doesn't matter. You still have a $30 million bill here, plus or minus, that you have to address. And that's the big thing. Big going forward planning, but you have a big backlog that you have to take care of too.
Well, I agree. I just think that our plan should have really 2 components. And one is annual recurring stuff that is sort of pick a number that you want to get done, and that just gets funded off the top. So every year we're not getting to the point where every single one of our schools or a lot of our roads have cracks and potholes and things. And then you have the second part, which is the core of the plan, which is these either backlog or item or semi-recurring or one-time items that come up based on planning. I just think we're sort of losing we're just constantly falling behind because we at least don't try and minimize the stuff we know comes up every year, because it gets pushed down in priority, because anyone will say, well, it's just a sidewalk, okay, until we haven't fixed sidewalks in 10 years. And then it's $1 million. So I would just like to see us work with the town on that. And I concur with McGovern's point that our numbers should be at least close to our priority 1 and 2 items, whether that's 2 million, 2.5, whatever it is. That's more the range we should be sending forward.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. So I have a couple of comments. I thoroughly concur with Ms. McGovern. You know, I've been sitting on this committee for several years now, and every year the number we ask for is always 500, right? And over the years we've gone from 20 million to upwards of 30 million for our CIP. This year, the first year, we did get some allocation, and we're trying to use those funds to upgrade some of the necessary requirements. But I also agree with Mr. Jones. I mean, I think the school committee would like nothing more than to work with the town council. But year after year, we haven't got funding for even the 500,000 we've asked for. We know for a fact we have to increase that amount. It has to go from 500,000 to $1 million, okay? This is an election year. I would love to have some of these candidates who are running for election or re-election to have some say in this matter. Is this an important issue for you? Is funding capital improvements to a school district an important issue for you? Because we're just going more and more in the hole every year. So that would be something that I would throw out there to people running. I mean, make a stance, say something. But hopefully the new sitting town council will work with the new sitting school committee to maybe further these efforts. I think that's important. But I honestly think that we have to increase the amount of money that we're going to allocate, that the town's going to have to provide, or if it's included in a bond, to the infrastructure of our schools. And, you know, not only our student representative here talked about, which I've heard also, comments from the kids running track, that there's no cushioning there and they're getting injured, but also the tennis courts are a liability, and we can't even host a tennis match here on our North Kingstown courts, which are also open to the public, and they get to come and play all the time. So that's another liability issue. We have to go play in Jamestown. And the turf is a huge issue. Those three are all understandably bundled together, and that's, you know, a different project. The school infrastructure, and that has to be weighed against one another, but these are all huge priorities. You know, North Kingstown is one of the finest districts in the state, but if we don't put money into the capital improvements of our buildings and our grounds, we're not going to be competitive. So I guess that's my 2 cents. Does anyone have any other comments? Yes.
I think it's especially important considering now, at least I'm from Jamestown, there's a lot of, especially with the choice between Narragansett and North Kingstown for high school. And I think for a lot of students, if you're looking at a school where the capital budget is not being supplied appropriately and the buildings are falling into disrepair and the fields aren't, it's providing a little bit of an advantage for Narragansett. We would want that Jamestown people to come to North Kingstown so much.
Thank you. Very, very well said comment. Yes, Dr. O'Shea. Did you have a comment? Okay. So
how do you guys want to go forward? I mean, I don't need a vote tonight, but I do have quite a bit of work that I need to do after you guys do vote for whatever we're putting forward, because I have the town forms to complete, and they take quite a bit of time. I told Phil Bergeron, our director of DPW, that it was either tonight you were going to vote or November 1st, and I tried to get him something quickly after that. I think what I need to know is, do you want more information from me? Do you want to vote on this total amount tonight and change the amount of the request to the town council? Maybe we can also change some language in there that maybe they can try to give us a heads up sooner than May, because, you know, if we ask for $5 million and we, you know, they give us something in May, you're not going to get a whole lot of work done over the summer. You know, we have a lot of planning that has to, we have bidding to do, we have approvals that need to go through, there's a lot of planning. Any anything that gets done at the school that's over $500,000 has to go through the RIDE, whether you're getting housing aid or not. So that slows down the process quite a bit as well. So really, in order to get a large project done over the summer, we would need to hear from the town by January, February, if they were going to give us a...
You know that's not going to happen. I think we have to be looking a year out.
And that's, as long as everybody's aware of that.
This request, that if granted, goes into effect July 1st, would be for the following summer construction.
So then it would be important that they don't call it FY18 allocation, because the allocation that we have right now, the $500,000, is called FY17 allocation. And although I know that we have another plan that we're going to be bringing to them to use up the rest of the $500,000 well before, to ask for well before the summer starts, I would be concerned that they understand that, you find out you get $2-3 million in May, you can't spend it in that summer. It would go until the following summer.
But if they called it capital, don't you have 3 years to spend it?
I don't really know what they understand, to be honest with you, but I know what they called it. They called it an FY17 town earmarked school department
It was never
capital.
given to the school department.
No, I know,
Yeah.
but usually a capital budget, you have 3 years to spend the money versus operating money that's only in that fiscal year.
Yeah, no, it wasn't.
But I
It
think-
wasn't presented like that.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Mary, we'll be able to allocate those funds and request that money for FY17, correct? The $500.
Yeah, because the second
And more so,
because
we'll at
that
least get
electrical
that.
popped up.
Right, because the electrical thing cropped up, and really, this second phase of the electrical, if we move forward with it, you're going to need to make an award of the bid by late February, because the lead time on the equipment could be up to 15 weeks to order it. So we will be requesting those funds, immediately, probably in March, because you'll need to make some sort of down payment for the contractor.
We'll use them in 2017.
We won't, well, yes, we will, because we're
Yes,
going to need to
that's
make an
okay.
payment, but that's not usually how it works, though.
Right.
Because we're always planning our projects, February, March, you're making awards in April or so, and we get started in July. It's a whole nother crossover into another fiscal year.
But in this case, I just want to make sure that we can use the entire $500,000
Oh, I expect that
allocated
we
to.
can.
Yeah, because, that's just a drop in the bucket. So
Right.
I would.
Well, just
Mr. Jones?
because it relates to what Sheila just said, is, maybe we shouldn't call this the FY18 capital improvement plan. We should just call it the NTSD capital improvement plan with a FY18 funding request.
Yep.
Because I would completely agree. If that's the case, then, the town could say, we're hoping to commit, whatever it is, $2-3 million, and, maybe we need the flexibility to spread it out a little bit.
But if they were going to be able to do that, they wouldn't be able to commit until they adopt that budget. And when isn't that early May?
It's supposed to be, it was in
Right.
late April last year, but
Right,
that's the
so
time
At least we
frame.
can put our proposal in.
So you're definitely talking a year later before you're under construction.
Right, but then I would love to have a conversation to say, can you commit to, X for sidewalks, right? I mean, stuff that we really need to get done over the summer, and say, if whatever number between the experts who look at this say, represents 10-15%.
Well, the one thing that I think you could do that with, that you could pull out of the $3 million, whatever the number is the phase 2 of the heating ventilation system at the high school. And
Right.
you're probably looking at, the estimates that we had to begin with were another $600,000 or so that we needed to finish that work. You could ask for that, now. We could get planning on that now. We have part of the plan to go anyway, and we pulled it for last summer because of the electrical work that came up. So you could do that as a side thing. We'd like this request, we know it'll take you until May to, determine what you can do in your budget, but in the meantime, early ahead of that, we would like to have $500,000 to finish the heating ventilation project at the high school. I really, really do not want to go past another summer without finishing that
Well,
project.
and that was from our high school accreditation, our number one
Right.
priority.
Oh, well, we've got a lot of solid numbers on that. We've got a lot of solid information on that. We had a whole study that was done, the recommissioning study that was done. And, you know, a lot of good estimates on that. Of course, again, you never know until you bid it out, but we're probably looking at over $600,000 or so to finish that. That could be one item that you could ask for as a side project to get started now, and we can plan that and get that going. Because that is almost through RIDE, because RIDE at least saw the first part, you know, so it would be familiar to them with the schematics and the design documents and all that. But that still would have to go through RIDE too.
So let me throw this out there. I'm proposing a motion to approve a North Kingstown School Committee, not with any years, capital improvement plan in the amount that Mary, approximately 30 million, Mary, that's in the packet?
Over 10 years, yeah.
Okay, over 10 years, with an increase from $500,000 to $1 million.
No, she suggested $1 million.
Sheila suggested two.
Can I suggest?
Okay, so what would you, so, this is a proposed motion, so from 500,000 to,
Honestly, Mary, could you fine tune that number for our next meeting?
Well,
That's my only concern is jumping the gun on that. If you're in agreement, if she could look at the number one priorities, break out $500,000 that we could actually spend in the summer of.
well, that would be 600,000 for the
17.
HVAC.
And then perhaps if the next year we could spend other money the following summer. It just depends on logistics, what it is that needs to be done. You know, you could bid a roof or a boiler. It just depends.
so what if we motion to approve the North Kingstown Capital Improvement Plan dated October 18th and task the superintendent to come back at the next
Because
meeting
you don't need a number.
with a
idea.
financial number request to go forward to the town council in December.
But I would add to that a separate requirement or request that the town allocates $600,000 to complete the HVAC system this summer.
Part of
Right.
his task.
Okay, but make sure that's carved out
It
of
would be
beyond
my
that.
pleasure.
Thank you, Dr. O'Shea.
And then the only last thing that I would say is that although we're going to come up with a number and have the priorities that we believe the priorities are, like we've said, I would not recommend that you tell the town exactly what you're thinking at this time you're spending it on. It's just, you know, it's general items, because what I'm concerned of is if you go to the town and say, we'd like to request $3 million and we're estimating projects A through D and these are the prices. If something comes up that something changes, we don't have any time to go back. You know, it's going to slow everything down again if we go back and say, oh, we've had to change this. You know what I mean? I think you need to be more general. You clearly know what you're going to approve and what you're thinking that money's going to go for. But if you're going to be specific and go to the town council and say, we want $1 million for this project, $500,000 for this project, and $600,000 for this project, I think you're making a mistake. I think you're being too specific with the town council, because that would be for you to decide after that.
On the other hand, I disagree, because the taxpayers want to know what they're funding.
Well, they will,
And
and they will after you approve it.
We could say that we're requesting X amount of dollars with the intention that that money be used for the following projects.
Generally.
But we don't necessarily have to say 600 is this, 700, you know.
Oh,
I
yes,
think that's
Right,
what you're
exactly,
getting
that's
at.
exactly what I'm
And
saying.
when we present, you know, Mr. Jones pointed out, you know, the importance of having, you know, videos of things and pictures of things. We will come prepared with that. We're going to do the best we can to get people to see what we're talking about here.
I think the videos are critical.
1,000 words.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is.
Mr. Jones has been advocating for those videos, and I think they're critical, because, you know, a picture's worth 1,000
I
words.
know, I got some photos, our poor facility
Yeah.
supervisor went
They
around
don't
and
do the
talked that
trick.
for me, but
David, start.
So, Mr. Jones, can you please make a motion to the effect of what you just said, so we can vote on it and put it into this? Slowly.
Okay, so
Slowly, with Ms. Sealy.
motion to approve the North Kingstown School District Capital Improvement Plan dated October 18th 2016 as presented by the administration and task the superintendent to come back at the next school committee meeting with a specific dollar amount request proposal for the committee to review.
Second.
Second?
All those in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Thank you, Mr. Jones.
One discussion from everyone.
We'll tweak it if necessary. So, does that bring us to the end of our meeting? Oh, the info, okay. Oh, my goodness, we're going to carry on.
So I've put a couple of pieces of paper in front of everyone tonight, and this is a follow-up on our discussion where we left off in the spring when we had the NESDEC people come and do a demographic analysis and pre-K through 12 school facilities best educational use study. And for those of you who are watching tonight, that study can be found on the front page of the district website. So if you want to see all of the conclusions of that study, it's very interesting, actually. And at the end of the study is kind of a condensed version of that is what I've included on these pages. The study ended with looking that the town, needs to think long-term. It needs to upgrade or replace school spaces that do not support 21st century educational programs. We need to be thinking in terms of maximizing efficiency, best use of space throughout the district, and it talked about a couple of options, both of which focused on middle school level primarily, but also have a lot of attention to just about all of the other schools, probably the least of which would be the high school, but that is the newest school that we have. And they talk about, in particular, Wickford Middle School as a focus. Wickford Middle School is 84 years old. It was built in 1932. To put this in a little perspective, we always talk about Barrington when we talk about test scores. Well, Barrington, on November 8th, is going to be voting for a new middle school. Their current middle school is 58 years old. Ours is 84. Theirs was made in 1958. Ours was made in 1932. And every time we talk about capital improvement and it involves Wickford Middle School, it's almost like you have to double and triple the cost, because now you're talking about asbestos abatement projects and just putting a new pipe through a wall becomes a major ordeal. And the question always comes up, it seems to be so old, don't we have a plan to do something where, why would we continue to put the money into this old clunker? Why aren't we investing in a new car? That metaphor. So, so for tonight's proposal, and I will read, and this is on the second page, I'm looking to get this ball rolling in terms of approving the framing of an RFP, a request for proposals for project management services to provide a long-term infrastructure project options in line with those presented by NESDEC. So we would have a project manager who would provide us with, here are some ways you can achieve your goals. And those goals would be addressing infrastructure needs of the aging facilities, upgrading and or replacing school spaces that do not support 21st century educational programs, and provide infrastructural upgrades that help the district long-term to realize operational efficiencies for staffing. For instance, if we can do this with 6 schools instead of 8 schools, that could mean some efficiencies in terms of how many teachers we employ, how many administrators we happen to have overseeing those buildings, etc. It could help us with transportation, where we have, possibly middle and high school kids going to a location where a middle and a high school are closer to each other than they are now. You could be looking at savings in fuel, whereas you have a drafty, old, inefficient building like Wickford being replaced with a modern, fuel-efficient, possibly with solar and all the fixings, that goes along with that to help to be efficient for the long term. And just that switch of one school to another, and then, not using a couple of other older buildings in the district, you can realize that, in that one fell swoop, that major project, long term, major savings for things like, fuel. We can also address something that we've had a real hard time getting to, and that is security features in our buildings. I speak with parents all the time about, is there a plan to upgrade for, entrance vestibules, and, what kinds of things are we doing, what kinds of things are we thinking about? And the ideas are there. It's not a matter of that. It's a matter, and this gets to the last discussion, that long-term funding, having not $1 million or $2 million every time there's a budget season and fighting over the last $400,000 or $500,000. That's going to happen. I understand that, but that cannot be our only focus anymore. It just can't. We need to be talking about, millions of dollars, not only on a regular basis to take care of these capital projects, but to put this in perspective, this middle school that's being proposed at Barrington is a $68 million project. That's the kind of investment that the town needs. But again, we're not talking about this for next year. We're talking about this for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, and 50 years out. But those kinds of things need renewal. And, if the people of North Kingstown need a metaphor to drive their thinking on this, I think it is staring them in the face with the town hall. A lot of very good people over many, many years have struggled with budgets year after year and have scraped for every dime year after year to make budget. And that usually includes just what we've been talking about with the capital project. Okay, this capital project will wait yet another year. We just can't afford it this year. And they're at a point where they've had to literally close the town hall, where the people making these decisions work. And it would be a shame, as Mr. Blasbalk said, if we have to start doing that with our schools. So that kind of long-term vision, that kind of long-term investment is desperately, desperately needed. And as we do it, we need to be mindful that we can, we're going to be paying major league bond payments to get there. But we can save on that operational side by finding efficiencies with the new plan. And ensuring, most importantly of all, that we have facilities that are superior to where they are now and are absolutely, comfortable and ready for our kids in North Kingstown to learn. So that's the proposal. We request that the committee appoint 2 members to work with Mrs. King and I, to frame the RFP. And the next steps going forward would be at the December joint meeting to inform the newly formed town council of the school committee's project planning and to enlist their support in receiving and reviewing options. Mrs. King and I were talking about this today, and we've talked to some of you before. It wouldn't make sense if the town council has zero interest in this, and we're spending money on an RFP and a project manager. I wouldn't necessarily be looking for them to fund this piece of it right now. Maybe join us in that endeavor down the road. Maybe right now, maybe that would be nice as well. But just to recognize the need to start envisioning what we could do and to get to this part and have a project manager come back to us and say, okay, here are some options, and here's roughly how much they would cost. Here are the buildings that we could build, and here are the buildings that, we could close or sell off. All those difficult and long-term visionary decisions in one package. And then start to set a plan in place so at some point 2 years seems to be ambitious, but at some point, to get to the point where the citizens of North Kingstown are already on bond with this long-term planning in mind. And then following a town council vote to support, this going forward, the school committee would then accept bids for this RFP that we'd be putting together in the next month or two. So that December meeting becomes good timing as far as this is concerned, because we're going to need a little time to put together an RFP and to start accepting bids. And by December, we'll know what the interest of the town council is in moving forward with us on such a project. So that's the proposal for the next step in this long-term study.
I would be interested in working on that.
Okay?
You've got two
Still
committee
gonna
members
be
on
here.
this? Well, you'll still be here.
Two that will still be here. Great.
You could theoretically lose in Harvard by not letting Kim.
Considering what you said about the capital plan, that just might happen.
Right, okay.
Yes, no,
We need a vote
I would
to
agree, that
appoint
makes
us.
sense to have two people we know sure will be here going forward.
So I guess I'll make a motion to appoint Mr. McGovern and Mr. Blasberg as representatives to work with Mrs. King and Dr. O'Shea on this long-term infrastructure plan. Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. We've done good. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
Okay. I want to thank you two guys
Thank you. Yeah,
for coming
great.
tonight. Your input is so valuable, and, we need to hear from the student body, and you're their conduit to communication here, so please come, be vocal, be negative, be positive, shade comments, but what we need to hear from your student body and you as the representative, so thank you so much for coming.
Can you explain this?